Thank you very much, President DeGioia. Thank you for the walk down memory lane that you gave me. I want to thank in advance Clara Gustafson for presenting your questions. I told her she could ask whatever she wanted. I often say the great thing about being a former president is you can say whatever you please. And the sad thing is nobody has to care anymore. I want to thank my friends who are here, my Georgetown classmates, the members of my administration, people I have known for many years, sometimes in both categories. I am delighted to be back here. The speeches I gave at Georgetown in late 1991, setting the stage for my presidential campaign and also for actually what I would do if I got elected, were very important, not only to shape the campaign, but for me. They forced all of us who were trying to win that election to think about where we were, where we wanted to go, how we proposed to get there. I thought it might be helpful to the students here, and this talk is mainly directed to you. I understand some of you showed up at 4:30 to make sure you got a seat, and I hope you didn't also get pneumonia, but I'm honored that you took the trouble to come. You can see that I have prepared this. No one has written this for me. I have thought a lot about this, and what I would like to do is to talk about organizing a life for service in the public good, whether as an elected official, a career public servant, or someone in private life who wants to do public good as a private citizen. I have given a lot of thought to this, and I've had a lot of time to do it. In just a few days, I'll be coming back to Georgetown for my 45th reunion. Those 45 years pass quickly. I am grateful that a whole set of chance circumstances brought me here today. I only applied to one college when I was in high school. I knew I wanted to come here, and I wasn't accepted until June. That's not the June, that's the June before the... And I think when I showed up, as a matter of fact, the first Jesuit I met said, "What is a Southern Baptist from Arkansas with no foreign language except Latin doing in the School of Foreign Service?" And I said, "Father, we'll just have to figure it out as we go along." I knew why I wanted to come here. When I was 16, and I'll say more about this later, I literally made a decision that although there was no basis based on my family or circumstances to think I succeed, that I wanted to go into politics if I could. And the typical route to that when I was a young man was to go to the state university, make all the friends you could, and then look for your chance. I thought it was more important to be well prepared. And I felt the world was getting smaller and that I needed to understand things that I could never learn if I never left the borders of my state. I had come to Washington in the summer of 1963 with the American Legion program, Boys Nation, and I wanted to come back, and the School of Foreign Service had the reputation of being the best and also most cosmopolitan undergraduate program in the city, and so I just applied. And I waited and waited and waited, and they let me in. I I'm very glad they did, and I'm glad I came. After I left Georgetown, I spent 5 more years sort of preparing to live my life. I went to Oxford, as President DeJoy said, and then I came back to law school at Yale, and that's where I met Hillary. And then I went home and briefly taught in the Arkansas Law School and started my political career. And with the interruption of 2 losses in campaigns, I was involved in politics for 27 years. And then after I left, I set up the Clinton Foundation, and I've done that since. And that was interesting to me because Hillary was the person in our family who was always involved in foundation activities, in doing public good as a private citizen. Working in the legal clinic when we were at Yale, setting up the first legal clinic we ever had in the northwest part of our state when we came home to Arkansas, organizing a group called the Arkansas Advocates for Families and Children, which still is doing well today. In our state, which was, when we came home, 49th in per capita income, taking the children's hospital to one of the 10 biggest children's hospitals in the country. She lived this stuff, and she was on all kinds of other boards. And when I was president, she got me to start meeting with civil society leaders as I traveled to countries around the world, not just to meet with the leaders and the leaders of the political opposition, but the non-governmental organization leaders. I did it in India and Turkey and various African countries and in Latin America. This was really her life, and it was one I had never imagined living. And I'll never forget, sometime in the first year after I left the White House, I got up in the morning and I was shaving, and I looked in the mirror and I said, "My God, I have become an NGO." So anyway, I say that because I've had the opportunity to see from the grassroots up how politics works through dramatic changes in our country's life. The year I graduated from Georgetown, 1968, was probably the most tumultuous year since the end of World War II, except for 2001 and 9/11. Perhaps even more than the tumult that occurred in the aftermath of the financial crisis. Then I've had the opportunity to start and attempt to build a non-governmental organization with a very specific focus that works in more than 100 countries around the world. So this whole thing has been extremely interesting to me. And especially these last 12 years, I've really had a good time. People always ask me, "Don't you miss being president?" And I tell the truth, once in a while I do. Once in a while, when there's some problem that I think I know a lot about, or some dilemma that I feel particularly well suited to solve, I think, I'd kind of like to do that. But I think it is foolish, and I hope all of you will remember this. It is foolish to spend one day of your life wishing you could do anything you can no longer do. Our days are limited. Like I said, these 45 years pass quickly. So it's always best to focus on what's at hand and what you can do, and to imagine and sometimes reimagine the tasks that you're involved with. And I've really had a great time doing this, but I realize I am part of something much bigger. One of the great good news stories of the turn of the century and the early 21st century is the explosion of the non-governmental movement. The United States has about 1 million foundations of various sizes, down to community foundations up to the Gates Foundation, which is not only the wealthiest, but arguably the best. They do wonderful work. And that doesn't count the 355,000 religious institutions all across our country of all different faiths that try to do public good as a part of their mission. Half of those foundations have been established since 1995. And you see it in India, 500,000 active NGOs based in India. And there are a lot more registered that may or may not be activated, I think, depending on the financial means of the people who registered them. China has about 250,000 registered, and probably at least that many more not registered for fear of political reprisals of one kind or another. Russia used to have 150,000, but Mr. Putin seems to think they're a threat. And in some ways they are, ways that by and large are quite positive. I remember thinking about the freedom component of the NGO movement when there was a hilarious cartoon that appeared in many newspapers in America at the end of middle of my second term, when I was in a long-running battle with the Republican special counsel, Kenneth Starr. So in this cartoon, I'm talking to the president of China, Jiang Zemin, and I said, you know, you ought to allow more political liberty. And in our country, these people you keep putting in jail, they'd be out there speaking on the street corner. He said, yeah, and in our country, Kenneth Starr would be in jail making tennis shoes. That was the cartoon. So it was really funny. Made me reconsider my whole position on liberty. But anyway, no. The point I'm trying to make is this NGO movement has also been a thorn in the side of governments. And they're like anybody else, they're not always right, but they basically have pushed the envelope of liberty and political responsiveness in a way that I think is very positive. So now, having had the benefit of about 40 years of experience in politics and in NGOs, I have reached a firm conclusion that 21st century citizenship requires every thoughtful person to try to do some public good, even if they're in private life. When we all came here, almost half century ago now, the definition of good citizenship was pretty much something like this. You should stay in school as long as you can and do as well as you can, and when you get out, you need to go to work. If you have a student loan, you should repay it. You should try to do a good job at whatever your work is. And if you start a family, you should try to do a good job with that, because raising children is society's most important work. You should pay your taxes and otherwise obey the law and be informed enough to cast an intelligent vote at election time. Now, even then, there were lots of people involved in public service as private citizens. There was the local United Way, there were people volunteering in their schools, there was wealthy people would give money to arts institutions and things like that, but nothing like today. And it was viewed as a nice thing, but not the imperative of every citizen. Today, with the explosion of internet giving, of cell phone giving through text, the tsunami was the first great international disaster where the United States gave $1 billion, and the median contribution was $56 because half the people gave over the internet. In Haiti, after the earthquake, the American people gave $1 billion. The median contribution was $26 because so many people texted Haiti and then a number for the Red Cross or the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund or any number of other things. The empowerment of technology has also imposed more possibilities and more responsibilities. So I have reached the conclusion that whatever your politics and whatever you do with your life, 21st century citizenship requires us to add to that litany that I brought with me in my head to Georgetown some way of doing public good as a private citizen around the corner or around the world, in office or out. And so what I wanted to do with this series of talks, of which I think there will be 4, is to talk about how to compose and live a life where service is important. I think that it is so important because the world is so interdependent. It is so full of opportunities. You see the other day the 2 more planets sighted in a constellation far outside our solar system appear to be far enough away from their sun and dense enough to support life. I'd love to be your age just to figure out if I could live long enough to find out if we're in the universe alone. I almost give up being president and take my chances on winning again just to find out. We have constant new discoveries in particle physics, thanks to the superconducting supercollider at CERN in Switzerland, which should have been in Texas, but I lost it as part of the economic agreement that brought the economy back in 1993. The human genome discoveries and applications are already stunning. I was at St. Jude's Hospital in Memphis, the biggest children's cancer center in the country, where they open source all their developments as soon as they have them. They send them to every cancer hospital in the world, on every continent. And they had just discovered, because of their ability to do genomic testing, the answer to a terrible riddle. There was a relatively rare but extremely dangerous form of childhood brain cancer for which there was a drug already approved by the FDA, which was 100% effective, 100% cure rate, except when it wasn't. And then it seemed to be causing the death of all the other kids, about 25% of the people who had this condition. And because they were able to do genomic testing, they found that in the cluster of kids that were not responding positively to the medicine, there was a different set of genomes. And then, almost as an act of God, they just decided to give the minority group that were all perishing, kids that came in that had that profile, half a dose of the approved medicine. They all got well. Then they said, well, maybe we were giving everybody too much. So then they gave the half a dose to the majority group, and it didn't help any of them. They had to have the whole dose. The point is, this apparently simple solution was made possible by the exploration of the billions of genomes in the human body. I spent $5 billion of your money to sequence the human genome. It now costs them $5,000 a person to do the tests. It will soon be down to $3,500, and the hospital told me they expected it to be at $1,000 or less within 5 years. So it's an exciting time to be alive. But we all know the world is full of many challenges. There's too much inequality and instability. It's a terrible constraint on growth and opportunity and investment. And there aren't enough jobs being created, not even for college graduates across the world. One of the reasons for the demonstrations of young people in Tahrir Square is that the Egyptian higher education system was producing 400,000 college graduates a year, and nowhere near 400,000 jobs for college graduates. Mexico, under the recently departed President Calderon, set up 140 tuition-free public universities, which last year produced, in a country whose population is about a little more than 30% of ours, 113,000 engineers. Stunning achievement. But will there be enough jobs for them? And will there be enough investment so that the poor will also find their path out of poverty? We have to do something about this. There's too much inequality and too much instability. But look what happened with the financial crisis. You want some instability. You want the possibility of failure, otherwise the successes in the free market won't be rewarded properly and invested in. But if there's too much instability and too much inequality, the whole thing shuts down. The world we're living in is clearly unsustainable. We have serious Atlantic warming, serious melting this year. There was a 90% of the area of Greenland, which has 8% of the world's fresh water. 90% of it melted last summer, had some melt. Typically, for more than 100 years since they've been measuring, the maximum is 50%. The oceans are becoming more acidic because they're trying to absorb more carbon to help us stay in balance, and it's interrupting a lot of the fishing stocks of the world, and fish provide protein, the main source of protein for more than 1 billion people. So for the last 2 or 3 years, it's the first time in history that more fish have been grown on fish farming operations than caught naturally in the oceans, the lakes, the streams, the rivers of the world. And there is as yet no international conference saying what they can and cannot be fed, as a result of which we are going to have bad consequences, the details of which we don't yet know. So the way we consume and produce and consume energy and other local resources have put us on an unsustainable path to the future. I don't know how many of you saw the New York Times article in the last 2 weeks about how many Chinese parents are desperate to find a way to leave China because their children are all getting asthma and they're sick. And how many who have the money to do so put their children in schools where the athletic fields are covered with tents, these great balloon-like tents with serious air filters in them so the children can get what passes for outdoor exercise. And I could give you lots of other examples. But the point is, the world is awash in too much inequality and instability and unsustainability. And finally, in this modern world where we can look at planets 120 million light years away and think that might be my great-great-grandchild's home, where we can imagine further advances in the human genome and nanotechnology that I also spent a lot of your money on, allowing all of us to have 4 physicals a year by just stepping into canisters that will measure us up and down and find all the malignancies before they can possibly be big enough to kill us. I'll make you a prediction. Within 15 years, one of the great debates in medical practice will be when to zap out tumors, because all of us have cancerous cells in our bodies all the time, and our bodies just dispose of most of them. So it's an amazing time. But what is really tearing the world up are the oldest divisions, the religious divisions, the political divisions. Yesterday, we read that there might be a new civil war in Iraq because finally the Sunnis, having rejected the extremism of al-Qaeda in Iraq, are now organizing around the old Ba'athist ideology and people who are there, and they don't think the Shia majority have been fair to them. We just read today, this morning when I got up, the story of the Nigerian military virtually wiping out a village in northern Nigeria in their ongoing war against Boko Haram, the militant Muslim organization which feels that its people have not been fairly treated in the Confederation, which is Nigeria, and on and on and on. You know all this. But it is very interesting that in spite of all this globalization, in spite of our being thrown together, in spite of the opportunities that I see, in spite of the diversity I see in this crowd, we still see the world put at risk when things don't work out so well in America for two young brothers from Chechnya who were given a chance to get an education and come here, and apparently it didn't work out so well. And so you had the Boston Marathon incident. And the young man that tried to blow up the car bomb in Times Square a couple of years ago, he and his wife both got university degrees in this country and were made to feel welcome. And for a while, he had a good job and a home and a mortgage, like all the rest of us do when we start out. And then it didn't work out. And he decided an appropriate response was to go back to Pakistan, learn how to make a bomb, and take it to Times Square. One of the things we learned in the genome is that the study is that all people are 99.5% the same. Even the gender differences are rooted in just 0.5% of our genome. We got people in this room today from all over the world, and if you just look around, every difference you can see between somebody else and yourself is rooted in 0.5% of your genomic makeup, and yet every one of us, even those of us who are fairly apolitical, spent 99.5% of our time worrying about that 0.5% of us that's different. Now, we can all laugh about it. I wish I were taller or thinner or faster. If I'd had a 4-foot vertical jump, I might have had a different life. But the differences do matter. That tiny bit of difference gave Albert Einstein a brain bigger than most people imagine could be carried safely inside a human skull. And he put it to pretty good use. And I could give you lots of other examples. I can say that I was 99.5% the same as Mohandas Gandhi, but he had a pretty remarkable life with whatever was in that little 0.5% that was different. On the other hand, most of the truly great people who have ever lived taught us how to connect the little bit of us that is different with the big part of us we have in common. So you are going to live in a world where you have to figure out how to reconcile all these challenges with all the opportunities. And I believe you will have no choice but to do public service, whether you're in private life or not. And I think that it will make a big difference for two reasons. One, there's always a gap between what the private sector can produce and the government can provide that you need non-governmental groups to try to fill. Two, in the poorest countries, systems have to be built. In the richest countries, systems have ossified and have to be reformed. And very often it can't be done entirely from within. So the new 21st century mission for non-governmental organizations, the whole reason for being of our foundation, is to figure out how to work with government and with the private sector to do things faster, cheaper, better, to break through the limits that the current arrangements impose on people all over the world. But to do any of that as well as possible, it is necessary to think about what you're doing and to have some idea. It seems to me that if you want to take service seriously, whether you want to be a political candidate or just a person who does right, there are 4 requirements. You should be obsessively interested in people, especially people who are different from you. You should want to understand them. You should want to understand how they perceive the world. and how they perceive what they need and what their dreams are. 2, you should care about principles, about the end of all this. What is the purpose of service? What's the role of government? What's the role of NGOs? How do you organize this in your mind? Why are you doing this? 3, what are the policies that you believe will advance those purposes? And 4, whether you're running for anything or not, what are the politics of the situation?